Hello and welcome. I'm Rashawn Gidwani and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the headlines for this hour. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi arrives in Pakistan to discuss restarting peace talks with the United States. President Trump expects an offer aimed at satisfying U.S. demands to end the 8-week war. The militant group Hezbollah dismisses the truce extension between Israel and Lebanon. Both sides continue to trade strikes as Israel maintains a strategic buffer zone near the border. Prosecutors closed the probe into the Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell regarding building renovation costs. The decision removes a major hurdle for the Senate confirmation of Trump's top pick, Kevin Warsh. The Trump administration considers invoking the Defense Production Act to assist in the restructuring of Spirit Airlines. Officials view the carrier as critical to national infrastructure amid ongoing economic pressures. Brazil's finance ministry shuts down 27 platforms, including Polymarket and Kalshi, to curb unregulated gambling. New rules ban derivatives linked to elections or social outcomes to protect household indebtedness. Washington targets Hengli Petrochemical for purchasing billions in Iranian crude oil amid ongoing peace talks. The Treasury Department also blacklists 40 companies part of Iran's shadow fleet to constrict Tehran's revenue. The White House grants a 90-day extension following foreign ships to move U.S. oil, fuel, and fertilizer. The move aims to lower energy costs and stabilize the economy during the continued Iran conflict. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth declares a global expansion of the naval blockade surrounding all Iranian ports. Officials warn Tehran to abandon nuclear ambitions as the U.S. Navy blocks Iranian vessels worldwide. And here are the top stories for this hour. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has stated that the United States does not hide and that many of its foreign military interventions are linked to oil interests. The remarks come amid ongoing diplomatic tensions between Moscow and Washington over global security and energy politics. The statement reflects long-standing Russian criticism of U.S. military engagements abroad, particularly in rich resource regions. Washington has consistently rejected such claims, saying its operations are based on security and stability concerns. Now joining us live to tell us more is Professor Rohan Gunaratne, international affairs expert, joining us live from Singapore. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. Good afternoon to you. So let's dive right into this. What do you make of the U.S.'s ambitions? Of course, 8 weeks into the war, it's quite clear now that with the full naval blockade on all Iranian vessels worldwide, that it does seem that, of course, with Trump's background being a real estate businessman, is to really control other ports in the world where he can essentially strengthen the U.S. economy. Tell me more about what insights you have on this, please.
90% of the energy products from the Strait of Hormuz, oil, gas, and other petrochemicals, do not go to the United States. The principal reason the United States intervened in Iran is because Iran has enriched uranium and they were manufacturing nuclear weapon. Second, of course, is Iran's cruise missile and ballistic missile programs where they could fire even beyond the Middle East. Third, of course, is Iran's support for Shia proxies, Shia and Sunni proxies, especially the Lebanese Hezbollah and Ansarullah. So certainly the oil story doesn't stand in this case, but certainly the Americans are interested in the oil market globally. But the United States has more oil than Russia and Iran. See, so my personal view is that uh, US intervention in Iran was driven out of security considerations.
Right. And, sir, of course, there's been an update today from Iran, which essentially points to the fact that Iran has missile capabilities that have been unused. To what extent do you believe that this is essentially signaling a stance from Iran that points to the fact that they are still willing to take part in on-ground operations with the U.S. and Israel? What are your thoughts, sir?
The capabilities of Iran's IRGC, that's on a decline. In fact, it is terminal, but it is very likely that they have some special weapons, advanced weapons that they have not used, and they may use it, but they cannot sustain the fight in the long term. They can't fight Israel and the United States because US and Israel are very capable, and they will decimate the remaining capabilities of IRGC. But the greatest fear is, of course, that Iran may use chemical, biological, or radiological weapons, and but that itself will result in an overwhelming response, not only by the United States and Israel, but other countries will join the fight. So I think it is not in the interests of Iran to use those advanced and those weapons that are called the special weapons that will cause so much of havoc, that will uh, prompt overwhelming response by the international community.
Right. And, sir, since you're on the ground in Singapore, of course, we're 8 weeks into the war now. Tell me more about the developments and actions that Singapore is taking to essentially safeguard energy security in Singapore.
Singapore has a very far-reaching policy and a far-reaching strategy. Singapore always thinks 10, 20, 30 years ahead. So Singapore has significant reserves, and Singapore is able also to tap into reserves elsewhere to ensure that there is sufficient supply of energy products in Singapore.
Fantastic. Sir, please stay with us. We'll be right back with you. Next up, Palestinians began voting in municipal elections in the West Bank and a part of Gaza in a first vote since the Gaza war. Polling stations opened in the West Bank and in central Gaza's Deir el-Balah area at 7 a.m. local time. Nearly 1.5 million people are registered to vote in the West Bank, as well as 70,000 people in the Deir el-Balah area of Gaza, according to the Ramallah-based Central Elections Commission. Most people in Gaza are still struggling to meet their basic needs during ongoing Israeli attacks in its war that has killed at least 72,568 people and wounded more than 172,338 in the Strip. These are the first Palestinian elections to be held since Israel launched its war in October 2023. Now joining us live to tell us more is Professor Rohan Gunaratne, international affairs expert, joining us live from Singapore. Sir, thanks so much for joining us once again. Of course, when we discuss this region, the Levant, how vital is it that these citizens must essentially keep moving forward, whether it's through elections or getting the hostages back from Lebanon into Israel as well, to maintain some sort of consistency and stability as far as their lives are concerned? Walk me through how these individuals can maintain that peace of mind in these dire times.
The Hamas-led terrorist attack or the terrorist massacre in 2023 resulted in an overwhelming response by Israel. And of course, when the Lebanese Hezbollah joined, Israel also attacked Lebanon. And finally, now Israel is going after Iran because Iran is the sponsor of Hamas and its allies, as well as the Lebanese Hezbollah. So what we are seeing is a new Middle East emerging because these capabilities of terrorist groups are diminishing. And it is very likely that in the coming months and coming years, the security and stability of the region that has now reached a point of uncertainty will become more stable, because once Iran, the nuclear dust is taken away from Iran and its proxy programs are curbed and its fissile and missile capabilities are diminished, the region itself will be safe. But this will require constant coordination, working together between Lebanon and Israel, working together between the United States and Lebanon and Israel, so and the Gulf. So everyone will have to work together to create a new Middle East, and that's what's happening.
Right. And of course, sir, in Europe, some of the immigrant numbers are quite staggering. To what extent do you believe that, of course, humanitarian aid will go back to this region? It's been reported in the last few weeks that humanitarian aid, like Red Cross, for example, have pulled out. So, of course, in this latest report, we're seeing that most people in Gaza are still struggling to meet their basic needs. And to what extent will Singapore also take in refugees? Is there a stance on that? I know Singapore is quite distanced geographically, but of course, there are still possibilities that some of these refugees may enter the city. What are your thoughts?
Singapore has provided significant humanitarian and developmental assistance to the Middle East, especially to the people of the Palestinian territories. Of course, Singapore will not take refugees because it's one of its uh, old policies. But I want to tell you that what is important is for governments that are wealthy and rich, like Singapore, should continue to provide that assistance. And Singapore leaders and Singapore's people are very committed to that vision and that mission. But I hope that other countries will also provide such assistance to the Palestinian territories and to other places suffering from conflict, especially in Africa.
Right. And sir, as far as the ceasefire being extended by 3 weeks between Lebanon and Israel, do you believe that this gives the Hezbollah proxy of Iran more time to kind of re-up as far as their militia is concerned? And do you believe that this 3 week ceasefire also gives Joseph Aoun and Benjamin Netanyahu the ability to further consider a long-standing peace, or do you believe that this will essentially fall again in 3 weeks' time? What are your thoughts on this situation, sir?
Already the ceasefire is being breached, but what is important is Israel and Lebanon is working together. Lebanese military is weak and they cannot uh, dismantle the Lebanese Hezbollah. So it is so important for the Americans, the Europeans, Israel, and other countries to strengthen the Lebanese military so that they can once and for all disrupt and dismantle the Lebanese Hezbollah. It is so crucial for Lebanese Hezbollah, which is driven by Iran, to be completely dismantled so that there will be peace, security, stability in Lebanon and globally.
Right. And sir, whilst we have you, I'd also love your insights and perspective on how you believe Iran and the U.S. can essentially come to the negotiating table as far as their peace talks are concerned. I've seen some reports where Iran is saying they're rejecting to meet Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner in person. So then how will this essentially be negotiated between the U.S. and Iran? What are your thoughts on this, sir?
US has 3 aircraft carriers in the Middle East. US has moved about a third of its naval and aviation assets to the Middle East. Iran will negotiate with the United States. And if they do not do that, the United States will strike them in the coming days. US is ready to do that. So I believe that it is in the interest of Iran to negotiate and to hand over the enriched uranium, which is a violation of international law. It is also important for Iran to have a verification mechanism where Iran does not have a military nuclear program.
Right. Mr. Gunaratna, thank you very much for your time. We'll speak soon. Much appreciated. Next up, Argentina's government has reiterated its willingness to resume bilateral negotiations with the United Kingdom in regards to a sovereignty dispute over the Falkland Islands, which Argentina knows as the Malvinas and has long claimed sovereignty over. The statement by Foreign Minister Pablo Curno was in response to comments from a spokesperson for the UK Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, and said that sovereignty of the Falkland Islands rests with Britain after an internal Pentagon email suggested reviewing the US position on the Falklands as punishment for Britain's stance on the Iran war. Meanwhile, the United States has reiterated its neutrality over the contested sovereignty of the Falkland Islands between Argentina and the United Kingdom, according to a U.S. State Department spokesperson. Now joining us live to tell us more is Thomas Porteous, correspondent from NewsX World. Mr. Porteous, thanks for joining us. As far as the Falkland Islands are concerned, it seems to me like this is similar to the Strait of Hormuz, right? It's essentially a location or real estate property that is contested between two nations. Tell me more about the geography of the Falkland Islands and how it can potentially contribute to the UK's economy. If you have any info on that, please.
Well, Roshan, the Falkland Islands have been administered by the British since 1813. Prior to that, Argentina did have a claim over them. However, since then, it has been over 100 years since the islands have been administered by London. The UK and Ireland actually fought, the UK and Argentina actually fought a war over the territories back in 1982 after the Argentinians invaded the islands, which resulted in a Argentinian retreat and a British victory. However, over 900 soldiers lost their lives. The island still remains very much disputed. However, back in 2013, there was an election of around 92% of the 3.5 thousand residents of the islands. They voted overwhelmingly to stay as British citizens. Now, ever since 1982, the Americans have maintained this stance of neutrality, admitting British sovereignty, but also acknowledging Argentina's claim over the islands as well. And so, of course, this trigger yesterday of this Pentagon memo certainly ruffled some feathers in London, as well as among NATO allies. Donald Trump supposedly, through this memo, calling territories like the Falkland Islands imperialistic territories. Of course, the president of Argentina, Javier Milei, remains a staunch Trump ally. The two leaders have been extremely politically close and have gotten closer together, and the same cannot be said for Trump and Keir Starmer and the so-called special UK-US relationship. This, of course, comes as tomorrow the King of England, Prince Charles III, along with his wife Camilla, are set to visit the United States in this diplomatic trip for the King, which is very rare, as the British people watch to see if Charles and his wife can possibly repair that fractured relationship between Starmer and Trump. So, of course, all eyes are indeed on this, and that transatlantic relationship between the United States and not just the UK, Europe as a whole, of course, Donald Trump seems to be very angry with. He's released a lot of statements expressing his anger with the rest of the members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization that they didn't step in and help him with the Iran war and opening the Strait of Hormuz. So, of course, there'll be all eyes on America next week. But as diplomatic real developments unfold, there is not much change here. There was, of course, alarm bells ringing when this memo got released yesterday, but now the US has confirmed that it will remain that stance of neutrality over the Falkland Islands.
We'll speak soon as we have more developments. Thank you very much, Mr. Porteous. Next up, Israel has not yet implemented an agreement with the United States to halt airstrikes in the Gaza Strip beyond the Yellow Line. Reports suggest that around the time of the ceasefire with Iran earlier this month, the United States asked Israel to halt strikes unless there was an immediate threat to the lives of troops. Israel reportedly agreed to the request, but continued carrying out strikes beyond the designated line. Meanwhile, Gaza Civil Defense says Israeli strikes have killed at least 13 people. Medical sources report that the bodies have been brought to Nasser Hospital after Israeli fire killed 12 in a separate incident. In Gaza, families are currently mourning the relatives who were killed in the latest round of strikes. Listen in to what some mourners had to say.
حلوا مشكلة عائلية، خبطوا الجيب، أطفال وشهداء فيها الهوية، شهداء شو بصير فينا حرام.
الحرب ما وقفتش، الحرب مش بس قصف، الحرب نفسية واقتصادية ومعيشية والخيام والعذاب والعرس وكل حاجة يا عم.
Next up, U.S. Kuwaiti journalist Ahmed Shihab el-Din has been released and has now departed Kuwait after being acquitted by a court. He had been detained by Kuwaiti authorities over social media posts linked to the Iran war, following a crackdown on online content related to the conflict. Reports state that Shihab el-Din was not seen in public since early March after being arrested while visiting family in Kuwait. He spent nearly 2 months in detention before being cleared of all charges. Press freedom groups and human rights organizations had called for his release and the dropping of all charges. Next up, Hezbollah has dismissed calls for a ceasefire as meaningless as fighting intensifies in southern Lebanon. The Iran-backed group says clashes with Israeli forces are continuing along the border, despite growing international pressure to de-escalate. Meanwhile, Lebanon's health ministry says at least 6 people were killed in Israeli airstrikes on Friday, with several others wounded. The strikes reportedly targeted areas in the south where cross-border exchanges have become increasingly frequent in recent weeks. Tensions remain high, raising fears of a broader regional escalation as diplomatic efforts struggle to gain traction. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.